Hey, welcome to the Intelligence Briefing Live What's the Buzz, where leaders and hands-on experts share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today we'll talk about red teaming and safeguarding for large language models. And who better to talk about it than somebody who's not only actively working on that, but who's actually written the book on it, Steve Wilson. Hey, Steve, thank you so much for joining.
Hey, Andreas, thanks for having me today. Always happy to be here.
That's awesome. Hey, this is the third time you're actually on the show. You're the first guest to be on 3 times. We talked about large language models last year, about 2 weeks ago for the launch of my book, the AI Leadership Handbook. You shared a lot of great advice in a short segment on security, but we said, hey, we want to spend a little more time on this today, because I also feel that it needs a lot more attention now that large language models are becoming more or less ubiquitous and embedded in so many more applications. But before I keep stealing your thunder, maybe for those of you in the audience who don't know Steve, maybe Steve, you can introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you do.
Great. Well, I'm the Chief Product Officer at Exabeam, which is a cybersecurity company that specializes in using AI to find cybersecurity threats. Last year, I got involved in creating basically an open source project called the OWASP Top 10 for large language models. And OWASP is a large foundation with a few 100,000 members that's dedicated to building secure code. And we did a bunch of research into what are the security vulnerabilities in large language models, because this isn't something that had gotten a lot of research, and that got a lot of attention. Last year, after that got rolling, I got an email out of the cold from an editor at O'Reilly, and they asked if I wanted to write a book. And I've spent the intervening year writing this book. So I was super pleased to be on your launch stream. And today is the launch of my book. So I'm hijacking your stream to give it back. So this is my O'Reilly book. It's called The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security, Building Secure AI Apps. And, it's been fun to do that because it lets me get much deeper into a lot of these issues than you can do in a, top 10 quick hit list.
That's awesome. Again, I'm so glad to have you on the show, and folks also check out Steve's book here on large language model security. So first of all, also congratulations, right? That's a big day for anybody that spent a year writing something and pouring your heart and soul into it and going through edits and revisions and getting some first excitement. Now it's the big day, so excited that we can all celebrate that together with you.
Awesome.
Perfect. Hey folks, if you're just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious how global our audience is. And also don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter, the AI Memo, under intelligencebriefing.com/newsletter, so you can stay up to date how you can run AI projects successfully. And again, this one, AI Leadership Handbook, is also available now on Amazon. Now, why don't we play a little game?
Okay.
To kick things off, right? We've been doing this for a while on the show. So this game is called In Your Own Words. And when I hit the buzzer, the wheels will start spinning. And when they stop, you'll see a sentence. And I'd like for you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind, and why, in your own words.
Okay.
So let's see. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Perfect. Then let me switch to this one. And so, if AI were a fruit, what would it be?
Oh man, the thing that just jumps to mind is strawberry. Did you load that question?
Oh, that's a good one.
But for folks who haven't been following that, the big news the last few months has been OpenAI secretly developing some new supermodel, and it was codenamed Strawberry, and they did release an early version of it, which is actually pretty fascinating. And I've been playing with that a lot the last few weeks.
Wonderful. That's an awesome answer. Didn't expect that one though. So good. Perfect. So folks, if we obviously skipped your answer this time, but if you have one, please feel free to put them in the chat as well. But now, why don't we jump to the main part of our conversation? And we already have a couple of questions prepped to guide our conversation. Right. So you mentioned, we're about a year after the release of the OWASP Top 10 for large language model apps, and that's how we first got in contact with each other. But I'm curious, where are we? What are you seeing? Are these threads that you discovered and that you described last year, are they still somewhat far away in the distant future? Are they already here? Are all of them here? What are you seeing? How real are these things?
It's interesting. When we go back more than a year now to when we published the first version of the list, I wouldn't say these things were hypothetical. Many of them, there were real exploits that we published and discussed. But I'd say the consequences for the people who fell victim to them were mostly embarrassment. Sometimes severe embarrassment, but it was mostly embarrassment. In fact, 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝘃𝗲𝗏, the CEO over at HackerOne, which is a really well-known security company, put out a list that was a variant of the top 10 that was the top 10 ways to embarrass yourself with Gen AI. And what's been interesting to watch first is the consequences are clearly much more severe now. We've gone from a car dealership in Central California putting up a chat bot that gets tricked into offering to sell people cars for $1. I don't think anybody actually got a car for $1. So they got embarrassed, but no consequences. On the other hand, now we're to the point where we see the AI agentry being added to really major applications like Microsoft Copilot and Slack, being vulnerable to the things at the top 10 list, like indirect prompt injection. And both of those have come out recently with being vulnerable to that, where we see the major companies like Apple putting out these announcements about how they're going to make their Gen AI environment secure. But often I feel like they're doubling down on their traditional security. Apple's like, I'm building a super hardened data center to put your data in. And I'm going to run the LLM locally on your device. And both of those are good things to do. There's no downside to that. But if you've got the LLM locally on your device, and that LLM is susceptible to some of these vulnerabilities, and you haven't dealt with that, and it has access to your data, somebody's going to trick it into doing something bad with your data. And we can see that coming, and we see those early results from the Microsofts and the Slacks and a lot of other people. It's not limited to them. The other thing that we see out there are some of the vulnerabilities from the top 10 list. Let's call it changing rankings. We actually did some revoting, and the expert group continues to grow. When we shipped the first version, it was 400 people. Now it's 1,400 people.
Wow.
So people jump in and vote and participate. And we did some re-ranking recently to decide where we wanted to focus. And I'd say there are two things that dramatically went up the list in terms of what people are interested in. One of them is what we call supply chain security. And this was on the list, but it was near the bottom. It was kind of a hypothetical worry that bad actors could get into your supply chain for where am I getting my models and my training data and my weights, and manipulate that somehow and make it bad for me. Well-known general cybersecurity problem, kind of hypothetical, not hypothetical anymore. When we look at these places like Hugging Face, which has become the de facto source to get so much stuff, and Hugging Face is an awesome site and community, but there have been a lot of researchers demonstrating there are thousands of poisoned AI models on that site. And we've seen examples where, major organizations like Intel and Meta have lost control of their accounts and their keys. And so that's going way up to the top of the list. Next time we publish it is understanding those supply chain concerns. The other one I don't think will surprise people, but agents. We had one vulnerability class for agents last time, what we called excessive agency, which is basically, are you giving the app more rights or more ability to execute autonomously than it really should have for its capabilities? If you look out in the AI sphere right now, for the last couple months, everybody's talking about agents. It's suddenly pivoted to that time where people want to unleash a lot more autonomy, but I think we're still in a very dangerous place where I don't think that's well understood what the security implications are going to be of unleashing that, and ultimately what the safety implications are.
I was just going to say, especially that part, right? On one hand, you have the vulnerability of the LLM, and to some extent the gullibility of it doing things that you don't intend it to do, but somebody else is getting it to do, or tricking it into doing, and then certainly putting it into workflows that are a little more critical, that are a little more high risk, that are a little more customer facing. Certainly can quickly go beyond embarrassing.
Yep. And look, people are not moving in small steps here. We see all sorts of examples where people are jumping straight from, you know, sales chatbot to medical application and financial trader. So, you know, we're getting to the heart of the matter now.
Yeah. Now, you know, that makes me curious, especially as you're seeing, and as we are seeing in the industry, that shift towards agents, towards more LLM-based applications of all different sorts and kinds in all different kinds of industries. How do you build these safeguards into the apps in around your LLMs? And doesn't that drive up the cost for checking and regenerating output if it's something that's harmful or something that it's not supposed to generate? How do people deal with that?
So one of the things that I have in the book is ultimately, when you get to the last chapter, there's a checklist of things you should be doing. The top 10 list was great for like, here's 10 things you need to understand that can go wrong. And I do cover all of those in the book. But the second half of the book is, what do you do about it? Right? Just giving me a list of problems is not helping anymore.
Yes.
So I would say one of the things is people sort of naturally jump to this idea that my defense, if I'm worried about prompt injection, my defense is going to be putting a filter in front of the LLM that's going to look for prompt injection. And that can be one part of the solution. And I do talk about some ways to do that and screen for things. But that's an incredibly hard problem. And I'd say for the most part, something I don't encourage people to solve by themselves. So the first thing to think about is for that part of the approach, you want to think about going and getting a guardrails framework. And there are commercial ones. There's a whole bunch of cool burgeoning companies. I could name a few and then I'll get in trouble for the ones I don't, but let's try anyway. You know, you've got Prompt Security and Lasso Security and Y Labs. You know, all these people are doing great stuff. You've got open source projects from companies as big as NVIDIA and Meta that are attacking parts of these problems. So I suggest people check those out because that's going to give you kind of the state of the art for that layer of defense. The other things that I say, though, the first thing on the checklist is actually more about what I will call product management than engineering. And that's about carefully selecting what you are going to allow the thing to do and not do. And actually really closing down your field of view. If you're trying to build ChatGPT in your OpenAI, there's a tremendous amount of things. And we all trip over ChatGPT guardrails all the time. Oh, I can't do that. But then people trick it into doing it because it's a very large space to defend. It's actually much easier to create what we call an allow list than a deny list. So if, as a product manager, I decide this bot is for helping with tax calculations, it's much easier for me to put some guidance, build it into that bot that says, don't answer questions that are not directly about taxes, then list all of the things it should not do.
Right. Yeah.
And when you think about it that way, you unlock some of these things where that's not a huge computational cost. That's just a smart decision.
That makes a lot of sense. I think putting it that way and giving it that persona of this is what you do, this is what you're not supposed to do, or avoid or ignore anything else, right? And again, comes back to the point that I think we talked about last year, almost like a zero trust boundary.
You know, what I tell everybody is you need to treat your LLM as something in between a confused deputy and an enemy sleeper agent. And really, you know, we're used to talking about trust boundaries in our software as the software is here. It's my software. I trust it. And what I'm trying to do is control what's coming in from the outside. The thing is, at this point, almost by the nature of many of these applications, they're designed to take untrusted input from the outside. And by proxy, I have to stop trusting the LLM. And that means actually, I put a lot more effort into filtering and checking what comes out than I do what comes in. It turns out to actually be, again, a much easier problem to solve and screen for. I can watch for, is it spitting out code if I didn't intend it to spit out code? I can watch if it's spitting out credit card numbers or social security numbers. Those are easy problems to solve versus, is this an attempt to hijack my LLM?
Right. That's great. I think especially the examples that you give of how to do that or where to do it, right? It's easier, like I said, to do it at the beginning than at the tail end of it. Which you know triggers another thought or another question here, and I haven't been really able to find good expertise on this, or people who can talk about this in depth and in breadth. Which is how do you actually red team your LLM applications? Meaning, you know you have something that's untrusted, but how do you go through all these scenarios? What are things you should be testing for? And how can your own security team maybe get more familiar with these techniques and upskill now that LLMs are here?
It's been a really interesting journey, and I've been exploring this from a few different angles. You know, personally, my day job being at Exabeam, we just added a bunch of Gen AI capabilities to our cybersecurity software that we sell to enterprises. So all of a sudden, I wasn't just the author writing about this stuff. I was kind of on the hot seat and responsible for it. And when we started putting this out and started putting it out in early access, and frankly, got some really great responses from users, I went back to the engineering team and started asking a lot of questions like, hey, what kind of guardrails are we putting on this? And what are we doing? And, you know, there weren't a lot of great resources for red teaming, but it turned out to be it was very easy to trip it up with even basic red teaming at the beginning, because these things are hard. But what I will say is, and the other part is, from the OWASP side, red teaming has become a huge topic within the expert group. You know, again, it was like, hey, what are all the problems? Right. Now it's like, all right, red teaming is a big part of the solution. How are we going to give people good red teaming guidance? And we did a panel on that at RSA that was really well received, and it's up on YouTube if you go look for it. OWASP Top 10 LLM Red Teaming, you can find it. But what I'll say is interesting, which is people coming to this from what I call an AI background, or coming to this from an AI angle, often don't have a lot of cybersecurity experience. And that's one of the tricks. So they don't necessarily know where to start. And the term red teaming has become pervasive in the community broadly due to LLMs. I was watching a clip off cable TV recently where Senator Chuck Schumer from the United States Senate was talking about AI red teaming and LLM guardrails, and my mind just exploded. Huh. So it's in the popular culture now.
Yeah.
You know, what we really see is that there's a tremendous amount of expertise on how to approach this in an obscure corner of your development organization at your enterprise called the AppSec team. And these teams sometimes feel unloved, but they're the ones who are charged with building secure software inside your enterprise. And they are coming up a learning curve about AI, but they know how to secure things and they know how to pen test them. And for a long time, we called that pen testing. And then, you know, red teaming is a different variant of that, but that's a good place to start with that piece of expertise. The thing about red teaming that's different, and I break this down in the book with a table that actually compares pen testing and red teaming, but AI red teaming is really, you want to attack it from a broad perspective. You're not probing it looking for traditional, you know, attacks. You're looking at it from a holistic point of view. security, safety. And it's really interesting to watch these teams that were viewed very narrowly, like an AppSec team in an enterprise, suddenly become much more important, where they're getting asked for questions like, how do I test this for safety? And sometimes they're uncomfortable with that. They're like, nobody's asked me this. They're like, I got nobody else to ask. You're the only person here with expertise on this. Let's figure it out. Some people get uncomfortable. Some people are really embracing it. And these teams are stepping up, and it's really cool to see them step up and attack this. Last thing I'll add on red teaming, if you don't have experience with it and you're looking to just get your feet wet, there's an awesome resource from a company called 𝗀𝗑𝗲. They're another one who makes guardrails frameworks. But the thing they got famous for originally was they put out basically a game on the internet called Gandalf. And it is a tool to practice attacking large language models. And so if you want to just get there and in a way that's not illegal or immoral, practice your skills at hacking LLMs and develop those red teaming skills, that's a great place to go get started.
Cool. I know what I'll be doing once we end the stream. That's for sure. I always love learning something new and getting new resources. Two things, folks. For those of you in the audience, if you have a question for Steve, please put it in the chat. We'll pick it up in a minute or two. And while you're thinking about your question, Steve, you mentioned you wrote a book and today's launch day. What's the name of the book again, and what does it look like so people know what to look for?
Yep. So the book is called The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security, Developing Secure AI Applications. It's from O'Reilly. And again, it's available today. You can get the electronic copies on Amazon or wherever you buy books. And they promised me the hard copies are on a truck somewhere. So coming really soon.
That's awesome. Fantastic. So folks, definitely check that out. So while we're waiting for questions to come in, you know, I think another aspect then is as you're thinking about red teaming, is that it's the usual teams that have been doing this kind of work for a long time. It's an additional dimension of how do we do this for large language models now? How do we upskill? You know, what roles do you see within these teams are best suited to do that? What skill sets do people have that they do red teaming, that do develop these safeguards? Is it the AI scientists? I think you said it's maybe not the best angle. Is it the pure security teams? Is it you know, is it English majors who know how to write a crafty sentence and elicit a good response? Where do you start?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, just in general, having been immersed in not just the security, but the development of Gen AI apps, it's interesting to look at the role of, let's call it, data scientists and machine learning engineers. Because at Exabeam, we have a bunch of them who've been developing, you know, deep machine learning models for high-speed analysis of data for 10 years. But when we added the Copilot with Gen AI, and we're using a lot of things people who watch your show would be familiar with. We're using a private version of Gemini inside Google Cloud, and it's an LLM. And we do RAG and prompt engineering and these things that we're all learning about together. The role of the data science there is very minimal. Like if you're a machine learning specialist in the world of large language models, you might be working at somewhere like Google or OpenAI, working on the next wave of those frontier models. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for that. But when it comes to building these apps, this is really a new skill set that we're all developing together about how do I build effective prompts and how do I do effective RAG? And there are ways to connect that up to existing machine learning technologies, which has been really cool to do at Exabeam. But I'd say what that means is that we're all developing these new skill sets. I think from a security perspective, those data scientists are the furthest away from doing this directly at your enterprise. Although there are a lot of smart ones at places like NVIDIA and Meta working on security guardrails. And I would just take advantage of that. I would not try to employ data scientists to build security guardrails for a new enterprise app.
Good point that you're making there. So then, what types of skills do you see if it's not the data scientists, but there is some knowledge needed that you understand what are the vulnerabilities? What's a good skill set that can test for these things? Again, is it more language? Is it more security? Is it something completely different?
I'd say that the the term red teaming existed in cybersecurity long before large language models, and so the first place is to look to those security teams that have experience in pen testing and red teaming. There are also great things out there that are cropping up. Companies like HackerOne. HackerOne is a really cool company with a cool business model where they basically run people's bug bounty programs for large enterprise. What they have is a million, literally a million hackers under contract, and they will come try to hack your stuff. And if they hack your stuff, you pay them because they will disclose to you how they did it. And in the last 6 to 12 months, they've added AI red teaming to this, and I've seen some amazing feedback on what you're able to do with that. So you're able to actually go out and basically crowdsource this expertise, which is really, really cool.
That is indeed an interesting business model as well. And I could see, especially for companies that don't necessarily have the bandwidth or already the expertise, right, who are still bringing up that expertise in their own organization to leverage offerings like that you just mentioned to augment their skills or, again, get some external help on this. Fantastic. Steve, we're getting close to the end of the show, and I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today before we wrap up.
Yeah, so from the topics we'd covered, I'd say this is a fast evolving space. I would say that if you're tracking this, you want to start to be aware of some of the newer places where the vulnerabilities are showing up, and these are definitely things like supply chain. If you're not just using a software as a service model like a Google Gemini, but you're off trying to run your own LLM. Or trying to use training data from third parties and things like that, really start to understand the characteristics of your supply chain. And then as you go out and start to think about adding agents to the mix, letting things execute autonomously and seek goals, really think hard about the implications of that. And lastly, please check out the book. Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security.
Awesome. Wonderful. Steve, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks, Andreas. Always enjoy it.
Wonderful. Folks, see you next time for another round of the Intelligence Briefing Live. What's the Buzz? Bye-bye.